In this video, which is basically about the important cases in conflict of interest, I want to talk about a term called fiduciary. I came across this term uh, when I became a board member. I was told that every board member is a fiduciary. Fiduciary is a person or organization that acts on behalf of another person or persons, putting their client's interest ahead of their own. So if I'm a fiduciary to say let us to my class, then I have to put the interest of my class, my students ahead of me. And my duty is to preserve good faith and trust. Being a fiduciary thus requires being bound both by legalities and ethics. So I am bound to the entity of whom I am fiduciary legally and ethically. And I have to act in each other's best interest. But should there be any conflict of interest, I as a fiduciary has to look at the interest of the client or the organization first. A fiduciary may be responsible for general well-being of another. For example, a child's legal guardian. But it often involves finances, managing the assets of another person or a group of people. For example, money managers, financial advisors, bankers, insurance agents, accountants, executors, board members, corporate officers, they all have fiduciary responsibility. So a fiduciary is legally bound to put the client's best interest. Fiduciary duties appear in a range of business relationships, including a trustee and a beneficiary in corporate boards, members, shareholders. So, for example, an investment fiduciary is anyone with legal responsibility for managing somebody else's money. So, I wanted all of you know that in all of the cases we will discuss the case of Rajat Gupta, the big Indian CEO of McKinsey. He had fiduciary responsibilities to the companies of whom he was director. Arthur Anderson had fiduciary responsibilities towards Enron to tell them where they were going wrong. So I just wanted to uh, take a few minutes in describing what is a fiduciary and what is a fiduciary responsibility. Recently, I came across a case where one of the chief executive officers, who was also a board member of a company, a highly technology company, a high tech company, he had started in parallel his own company, stealing the IP of the company the company of which he was the CEO and the director. So when a charge sheet was made against him, I had the opportunity to work with a very senior lawyer, and the first question which the lawyer told that person is, "You had your fiduciary responsibility." I was very surprised that the accused did not know what was fiduciary responsibility. So I wanted to teach you, my students, early enough in your careers as to what is meant by a fiduciary. Who is a person who has fiduciary responsibilities? What are those responsibilities? So if you are managing anybody else's resources and you have a contract to manage it, you are a board member, then legally as well as ethically you have fiduciary responsibilities. You must fulfill those responsibilities even if you are an independent director. What is an independent director? Independent director is a person who is nominated to ensure that there is good board governance, and he may not be very important in taking strategic decisions really, but he is to ensure that the management, the concept of fairness, equity, justice, inclusiveness are enforced in the company. Even if you're an independent director and you're getting just a sitting fees, that means when you come to attend a board meeting, you get a sitting fees and you're not drawing any remuneration per se. Even then, you have fiduciary responsibilities. You cannot reveal what happened inside a boardroom You cannot indulge in loose talks, because that is all contrary, or that is all in opposition to your fiduciary duties. To explain the conflict of interest, I have taken two cases, and I hope that these two cases, when I illustrate these two cases and we discuss these two cases in all its ramifications, you will be able to understand the conflict of interest. This is I've tried to do some research on the case of a cricketer and the case of a former celebrated corporate leader. So, in the case of a cricketer, I am taking the case of Rahul Dravid. In fact, I am basing my case, I am basing this presentation on the basis of the article which I wrote for Rediff.com. How Dravid can avert the conflict of interest charge. How Dravid, means Rahul Dravid, how can he avert the conflict of interest charge? And this was published in August 2019 in Rediff.com under the it was published under two sections, under cricket section also and under business section also, and also under news section. So uh, and I got a lot of email. I got a lot of emails from the readers of Rediff asking me questions, and some asking me, there is no conflict of interest against Rahul Dravid. Rahul Dravid is a saint. So I explained to them that saints can also come across conflict of interest charges. We all make mistakes. And the second case is of Rajat Gupta. Rajat Gupta is a case of insider trading. How Rajat Gupta, who was a director, so director means he had a fiduciary responsibility. So what is a fiduciary? In case of an organization and a fiduciary, the interest of the organization is paramount for the fiduciary, because the company places full trust and faith in the fiduciary. So fiduciary responsibilities. So the second case is of Rajat Gupta, wherein he broke the trust of the organization, namely Procter and Gamble and Goldman Sachs, by revealing information which was not yet, he was not authorized to reveal those information, and he revealed that information selectively to his friends so that they could profit out of it. So let's take in this slide the case of Rahul Dravid, and I have paraphrased it that what does Rahul Dravid need to do to be able to join NCA? NCA is National Cricket Academy, without carrying the blemish of perceived or potential conflict of interest. So, in conflict of interest, we have discussed actual conflict of interest, potential conflict of interest, perceived conflict of interest. So, in fact, a report was, somebody had filed a report to the ethics officer, Mr. Jain, against Rahul Dravid. And I start the article by saying Rahul Dravid is the second best test batsman that India has ever produced. Second best. I'm not calling him the best. So I'm also not calling Sachin Tendulkar the best. Sachin Tendulkar, I'm saying Rahul Dravid ranks alongside Sachin Tendulkar, in my view, as the second best test batsman of India. The guy sitting at the top is that fabulous opener of yesteryears, Sunil Manohar Gavaskar. Bit of a digression. I'm not including Kohli in this list as yet because I think he has a long career ahead, and he may eventually displace Sunil Gavaskar also in less than a decade or so as the best batsman. So Rahul Wall Dravid, he was called the Wall. He's one of the most lovable blokes in the world, in the cricketing world. He has very high determination, but he's not overly ambitious. He has a mind that can devise a strategy, a mind that can devise a strategy, and he is willing to work himself hard to implement that strategy on the ground to achieve the objectives of strategy. This is a rare combination. There are very, very few people who have great strategy and who have great strength to achieve that strategy. Normally, you will find a guy with a great vision, great strategy, and he's able to get a team, and then like a great CEO who are the COO. So they work in. But Rahul Dravid, I mean, what a fabulous guy he is, and still I'm charging him. I wrote that he had a perceived and even a potential conflict of interest. So let me explain the basis of or the rationale of my charges. See, as a successful and influential coach, as a successful and influential coach of India under 19 and India team A, India became world champion, India under 19, and Rahul Dravid was the coach. So he has already proved his mettle as a coach. So he's now Rahul Dravid was when I wrote this article, he was offered uh, the job of the head of National Cricket Academy in Bangalore. So he's very qualified, because he's been such an influential and successful coach. He has demonstrated that he is committed to his teams and he is able to inculcate a sense of discipline in the team. Also, his record as an all-time great batsman and his success as a mentor and a coach is also matched by his greatness as a human being. Just to recall that in early 2018, when the Junior World Cup was won by Indian team, he was given a cash prize of 50 lakh rupees bonus. He refused to accept it. He says, I am not the only one who contributed to this. All the support staff should be awarded equal bonus. So if need be, split it. So in a super competitive era, who does it? Who does such a thing? You have to be a saint only to be able to do such a thing. So that means he is respected by one and all. I don't know what did the BCCI do eventually, but what I know for sure is that it endeared him, his act of asking that all support staff should get equal money. It endeared him to a lot of people. So it is no surprise that Rahul Dravid was appointed as the director of NCA. NCA, just a bit about NCA or the National Cricket Academy at Bengaluru. It came into being in 2000 under the chairmanship of Raj Singh Dungarpur, who was then the chairman of BCCI. He wanted to build a cricket academy in India alongside, which could rival the cricket academies of Australia and England. So NCA is mandated to turn young players with outstanding promise into players who could represent India in future. Many star players are product of NCA. Parthe Patel, the former glovesman, still the glove, not the former glovesman. Uh, he still plays Ranji Trophy for, I think he plays for Baroda. Suresh Raina, the left-hander who is not playing IPL. Shikhar Dhawan, the guy who scored two back-to-back centuries in the ongoing IPL. Gautam Gambhir, who won IPL for Kolkata 2 times. KL Rahul, the current wicketkeeper batsman, who's leading Kings 11 Punjab to glory. And of course, not to forget Virat Kohli. All these guys had a stint in NCA. Some had longish stint, some had shortish stint. But so Rahul Dravid's appointment, when I wrote this article in 2018, so it was welcome, but it came with a conflict of interest charge. And the charge was not from anybody who's an unknown entity. It came from the office bearer of one of the state associations. What was the charge? The charge is that Rahul is also vice president of India Cements. Now, India Cements is what? India Cements is a company. Managing director is Mr. Srinivasan, the former BCCI president. And India Cement is the de facto owner of Chennai Super Kings, the IPL franchisee, which is captained by Mahendra Singh Dhoni, the great captain. So why is Rahul Dravid employed with India Cements? He's employed there as a vice president. He's not employed for any of his marketing skills or HR skills or business skills. He's employed by India Cements to give various inputs into Chennai Super Kings. Now here, so Rahul Dravid is an employee of India Siemens and Rahul Dravid is a director of NCA. So there is no actual conflict of interest right now, but there can be a potential conflict of interest, and there can be a perceived conflict of interest. So Rahul Dravid would have a clear case of conflict of interest if one of the best pupils in NCA, suppose one of the best cadets of NCA, becomes a target of acquisition by Chennai Super Kings. There is a guy who's very brilliant, and Chennai Super Kings wants to pick this person, and they want him to play for Chennai Super Kings. There is open auction, I know, but would Rahul Dravid's behavior towards this his pupil, would it change if he were to know that this guy has become a center of attraction for his employer? So he would, even if actually his behavior towards this person or this pupil or this trainee does not change, people will have a mind, and this can be a potential conflict of interest, isn't it? So to explain to you where exactly does the potential conflict of interest come in, let me give you another example. Rahul Dravid is the Vice President of India Cements, and in his capacity as the Director of NCA, he comes across a rare talent among his wards. Would he not be tempted to tell Chennai Super Kings management about this young lad? Maybe, maybe not. But this is what conflict of interest is about. A conflict of interest is a set of circumstances in which a professional individual has competing allegiances. Conflict of interest is faced by a person who has two associations that may, and not always, but in some rare situations, may struggle with each other. So loyalties could get divided. So Rahul Dravid has this clear case of potential or perceived conflict of interest. Think of a situation also where a player who already plays for Chennai Super Kings is in the reckoning for Indian cricket team, and the BCCI has sent that young player to NCA, because players are sent to NCA. So suppose there is a player XYZ, and he is a player who plays for Chennai Super Kings. He's in the team, and he's also selected. He's also in the radar of BCCI. BCCI gives contracts to players in India. A player may have played or may be about to be playing for India, and these contracts are of various varying values, various fees, or various remuneration. So some people may get 50 lakhs or 1 crore a year, some may get less than that. So if he comes to NCA also, if BCCI recommends this player to NCA, is it not possible that Rahul Dravid will show extra favor to this player? He may not show, he may not show that, but other players who are not from Chennai Super Kings, they may have a feeling. So perceived conflict of interest is there. So what should Rahul Dravid do? So Rahul Dravid, he said that he has taken leave of absence from India Cements. India Cements will not pay his salary during the time when he is serving as the director of NCA. So he says there is no conflict of interest. But what I have proposed is that even if he has taken leave without pay, there is some conflict of interest, because he knows that he has to go back to India Cements. So that means the door is not completely shut. He has kept his foot. The door is open, ajar. He has kept his foot in the door. Mind you, Rahul Dravid has never indulged in any favoritism or any nepotism. Perceived conflict of interest. Am I stretching it too far? But people like Rahul Dravid are paragons of virtue. So suppose it was a person who was less virtuous than Rahul Dravid, I would not have even raised it. I want to protect Rahul Dravid from all blemish. Eventually, this case was disposed of by the ethics officer. He said Rahul Dravid will not get any salary. He's on leave for 2 years, so there is no conflict of interest, and the case was dismissed. But I beg to disagree. For a man of the stature of Rahul Dravid, I think he should resign from India Cements as vice president. And he should, once he resigns, then there is no conflict of interest. Actual, perceived, potential, none. But if he's on leave, there is a conflict of interest. And I also say this, that the conflict of interest may not be there immediately, potential conflict of interest. Tomorrow, as I explained, a player who plays for Chennai Super Kings comes to NCA for rehabilitation. You know, NCA, people also go to NCA. Fast bowler recently went to NCA when he was injured, because NCA has physiotherapists and the medical staff, so all the rest, recuperation, training, retraining, strengthening exercise, everything is done there. So if somebody from Chennai Super Kings come there, there could be an allegation of nepotism or favoritism. So I have said it's not end of the road. Rahul Dravid should not resign from India Cements. Should not take leave. He should resign from India Cements. I have also said that he is too big. Rahul Dravid is too big a person to be tied down only to one company. I mean, he's the director of NCA. NCA is a company which has got a national. NCA is not a company; it's an organization which has got a national stature. India Cement is a very good company. It's a big company. It's a 5,000, 6,000 crore company which pays income tax of 25 crore corporate tax. So he can resign from India Cements. He should fully concentrate on his job of director NCA, and after he has completed, he can go back to India Cements. I'm sure it will be happy ending. But right now he's on leave, and I have highlighted this case. I'm a big Rahul Dravid fan, but I think a spade is a spade is a spade is a spade. Some people have also said that Saurav Ganguly also has got conflict of interest. He is a brand ambassador for a company which is an advertiser for IPL, and Ganguly, Saurav Ganguly is the president of BCCI. IPL is organization of BCCI. So how can he be a brand ambassador to a sponsor? I think it is My 11 or My Cricket 11 app. He comes and he says, okay, you play this, you play like this. So, but I have a slightly different take on this. It would have been best if Saurav Ganguly had not become a brand ambassador for that company. I admit it would have been best, because a president of BCCI is a brand ambassador for one of the sponsors of IPL. I tried to find out that My Cricket 11 is not exactly a sponsor or a co-sponsor, but it is a big advertiser. It doesn't behove the stature of president of BCCI to be to be modeling for a one of the guys who's a sponsor. But there is a catch here. Saurav Ganguly does not get any salary as the president of BCCI. It's an honorary position. So a man is allowed to earn for himself. A man is allowed to take care of his daily needs. So I can't put it at the same pedestal as the case of Rahul Dravid, but perhaps my students can think about it, because it is said that even if you are in an honorary position, you have a responsibility to the organization. Even if you're not getting salary, you have a responsibility to the organization, and you can't be seen to be a brand ambassador of a company which is one of the advertisers or sponsors. So the debate is on. Think about it and let me know. Write to me. Let us discuss the case of Rajat Gupta. Rajat Gupta, the IIT trained boy who went to Harvard and who completed his MBA from Harvard with a distinction, and somebody who was a toast of all the Indian community, the big Indian community in the United States and elsewhere. Rajat Gupta, who founded the Indian Business School in 1997, and Rajat Gupta, who was a very sought after speaker in all the Indian universities and various business bodies and associations, and a much loved person. If you talk of Rajat Gupta, if you ask me, I used to look up to Rajat Gupta uh, till about 2005, 2006, or before 2010. He was a person very well educated, an Indian to start with, who took a citizenship of the US with impeccable academic credentials, as a person who had worked hard, very hard, to go to rise in the corporate circles. He was born in 1948, so he was not exactly a midnight child, but he was born in an era. So 1948, when he was born, if you add 20 years to it, 58, 68, 68, when he must have completed his graduation. At that point in time, the job scene in India was very tough. So for such a person to have such a rise is truly, truly remarkable and worthy of appreciation. He was born in Calcutta to a Bengali father and a Punjabi mother. The father's name was Mr. Ashwani Gupta, who was a journalist with Anand Publication, and mother used to be a teacher in a Montessori school. So once again, a middle class background, and this couple had three children, and they moved to Delhi from Kolkata, Calcutta. It was known as Calcutta then, not Kolkata. They moved to Delhi in after 5 years of Rajat Gupta's birth, and his father started. He was the first, I think, editor of Hindustan Standard, and they stayed in Delhi. Mother also took up a job of a teacher in one of the schools in Delhi. Unfortunately for Rajat and his siblings, the daddy died when he was only 16, and mother also died when Rajat was 18. Rajat Gupta was studying in modern school Delhi, and a very courageous guy, very courageous threesome. This they decided they will live on their own. They took tuitions, took odd job, and finally he graduated from IIT. Rajat Gupta graduated from IIT. It is said that when he graduated, he was among the top rankers from IIT. Even in the entrance examination, he had stood 15th or 18th in the merit list. So when Rajat Gupta completed his graduation, he got an offer from ITC. So he says in a TV interview, the first time he sat on a plane when he had to travel from Delhi to Kolkata for an interview, and he said that interview was essentially to tell them that he would not be able to join because he had been selected for Harvard Business School once again on scholarship. His IIT was on a scholarship. His MBA from Harvard Business School, the top business school in the world if you want to be a management graduate. Why I'm telling you the build up to insider trading? I want to tell you the rise of a man and the heights he achieved, and then the trap he fell into. So the Rajat Gupta story tells us several things, that good men, men with who have worked hard in their life, they can also fall prey to greed if they are not careful. Number one, number two, if they are not adequately informed about the laws, because we tend to ignore that uh, the action which we are taking, is it lawful? An action may look very innocuous, but that action could have legal ramifications. I'll explain to you what is insider trading after some time, but continuing with the, so he completed his MBA, and he applied to join McKinsey and Company. McKinsey and Company is a consulting company. For a consulting company, its annual turnover is $10 billion. So 1 billion is 100 crore. So 1,000 crore, isn't it? 1 billion is 100 crore. So 1,000 crore dollars. So multiply by 70 if you want to arrive at the how big a company is in terms of rupee. It is said that he was rejected by McKinsey and Company. because the interview panel thought that Rajat Gupta had little experience or no experience. But one of the senior guys, he overturned that decision and they took him in, and he rose very fast. So 1973 he joined McKinsey, and in 1994, so 83 93, in 19 years he became managing director of McKinsey. McKinsey, when he joined McKinsey, it was considered to be a very secretive and a low-profile consulting company. But in his 19 years, he opened 23 new offices, and he used to get and the company zoomed up, shot up. He and another guy, I think his name is I will find out. I think his name is Alok Kumar. They together, he took him and mentored him. They took this company McKinsey to great heights. Of course, McKinsey as such was not a small company, but to open 23 new offices in 19 years, that means every year you were opening more than one office. So after three terms, he would have retired. So 94, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. So 2003, he retired as MD. But after MD, because that was the rule in McKinsey, he became a senior partner. So 2003 to as a senior partner, again he retired in 2007. But he got a title of senior partner emeritus. That means lifelong. So his salary, even after he retired after 2007, was, they say, was $4 to $5 million. As a CEO, as the MD, his salary, highest salary was $10 million. So very well, I mean, he deserved all the salary and the perks he was getting. So 2007, he became senior emeritus partner, and so that means he was not involved in day-to-day running of PNG, or he was just a, it was just a title kind of a position. And these dates are important because I want to tell you how he rose, and even after retirement, how did McKinsey like try to retain him as a kind of a sounding board, or perhaps as a thought leader, or perhaps as an inspirational figure who could still guide the McKinsey team to grow and expand and progress. After 2007, he was then free. He joined the boards of several companies. One of the subsidiaries of American Airlines, he joined Genpact. You know Genpact. Genpact is there in India in a very big way. He joined Harman International, but two big companies. He joined Procter and Gamble as a board member, and he was there from 2007 to 2011. Just to give you an idea of how big Procter and Gamble is, Procter and Gamble is a 70 billion US dollar company, 70, huge company. And he also became a board member of Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs is also a global investment banking, securities and investment company, and the turnover of Goldman Sachs is $36 billion. So he was a MD of a company which is $10 billion, and after retirement he joins a company. He joins the board of companies which have revenue of 70 billion US dollars and 36 billion US dollars. Why am I telling you all this? I'm just trying to tell you that life was struggle for him, but once he joined McKinsey and Company, life was a bed of roses for him. Of course, he worked hard. He worked very hard to go up in life. This also tells you the culture of America, the corporate culture, where a winner takes it all. A winner is paid handsomely, he is feted, and he gets all the bouquets. But mind you, if you falter and if you commit unethical act in US and you are caught, then you get the brickbats. Your rise may have been very steady, but your decline is equally fast. Let's come to the transgressions of Rajat Gupta now. In September 2008, mind you, he was senior partner emeritus in Goldman Sachs. So I don't want to associate him with Goldman Sachs. during the time of these scams, or can we call this scam? We will call it insider trading. In 2008, after after a board meeting, and board meeting is supposed to be a secret affair, because in the board meeting only people who are present, chairman of the board members, if need be the CEO of the company or the CFO of the company, and the company secretaries, and if the company wants, maybe internal auditors, or so it's a discretion of the chairman of the board whom to invite, and everything is confidential, everything is recorded. Minutes are made of every board meeting, and these minutes of the meeting are supposed to be preserved. It is upon the chairman of the board, not even for managing director, the chairman of the board, to decide what information he wants to make public, what information he does not want to make public. So one thing significant happened in that board meeting. In that board meeting, it was revealed that Warren Buffett. Who's Warren Buffett? Warren Buffett is world's richest man. I don't know if he's richest or second richest or fifth, one of the richest man in the world, who has investments in many companies, and his own company, what's it called? Berkshire Hathaway. So it was revealed that Warren Buffett wants to make an investment of $5 billion in Goldman Sachs. $5 billion. So he wanted to buy a part of the equity. Uh, Now, Goldman Sachs, as I told you, has a 36 billion revenue. It's also a big company. And if there is a guy like Warren Buffett who wants to invest in that company, that means the stock price, the share price of that company will go up. Within minutes of receiving this information, Rajat Gupta, after the board meeting, within minutes, he made a call to a guy called Raj Raja Ratnam. Now, who's Raj Raja Ratnam? He was heading a hedge fund, an investment company called uh, uh, Galleon or something. He's from Sri Lanka and a friend with Rajat Gupta, very active in stock market. So he makes a call to Rajaratnam and he tips him about this. It has not been proven till now that it was Rajat Gupta who tipped it. I don't want to get into the legal thing, but the fact is Rajat Gupta had to go to jail for insider trading. Now, this is insider trading. Insider trading means when you selectively leak information without authorization to people selectively so that they could profit out of it. Simple. You have information, inside information, confidential information about your company which is not yet in public domain. If you like to put it in public domain, there are procedures to follow. There are procedures to follow as to how you can declare. Sorry for the brief interruption. So as I was telling you that if Goldman Sachs had wanted to make this information public, that Warren Buffett is willing or is interested in investing in Goldman Sachs, then it would have gone about it in a proper manner. An announcement would have come to the press. But before this could be done, Rajat Gupta allegedly tipped off Raj Ratnam, and Raj Ratnam brought many shares for, and at an unbelievable price. It is also said that that when this guy Rajat Gupta was, because he was also on the board of Procter and Gamble. In January 2009, Procter and Gamble in the board meeting revealed negative earnings. Once again, Rajat Gupta tipped off his friend Raj Rajaratnam, and Rajaratnam, he sold this holding of Procter and Gamble and avoided huge losses. It is said that, I don't want to get into the figures, that Raj Rajaratnam would often boast that he knew people inside, and he had the power to know what is going to happen in few companies, especially the companies where Rajat Gupta was a director. Why did Rajat Gupta do it? As per one of the conversations which were taped conversation between Raj Ratnam and another guy, another Indian guy, he would claim that that Rajat Gupta wanted to make uh, so many $1 billion so that he had to do nothing. So at worst it was greed. At best, to give benefit of doubt to Rajat Gupta, that he was just trying to help a friend and he didn't know that this would be ramification. Now this I cannot believe, because a guy who studied in IIT, okay, IIT he studied engineering, but who went to Harvard Business School did not have a course in ethics. I can't take this. I am very sure that after he retired, although he was still getting some retainership from uh, McKinsey and Company, Rajat Gupta became a bit greedy. He had also immersed himself into several philanthropic causes. It is said he did a lot of charity work. He did a lot of charity work, but when he was sentenced to 2 years in jail, the court said even if Mother Teresa were involved in a forgery or in a crime, financial crime, it would investigate Mother Teresa. So just because Rajat Gupta did charity work, it cannot absolve him of all the irregularities he committed. Rajat Gupta, he was, I think, Rajat Gupta, he was in jail for 2 years, and after that he spent few years in his Manhattan apartment in home confinement. Shameful thing was that a band was put around him, perhaps a RFID band, so that wherever he went, his movements could be tracked. He was allowed to go to his offices. He went on appeal to the highest courts, but his appeals were rejected. He tried to make a comeback, once he was released, he gave an interview in NDTV. But once you have fallen from the grace, it is very difficult to salvage your reputation. What happened to Raj Rajaratnam? Raj Rajaratnam got 11 years in jail, including solitary confinement in the house. I think he's still serving the jail term. So, by telling you this, by narrating the story of Rajat Gupta, I want to tell you the seriousness of insider trading. You have a fiduciary, as a director, you have a fiduciary responsibility towards your company. What is a fiduciary responsibility? A fiduciary responsibility is that if you have to choose between your company and your personal interest, you will choose the company's interest, because the goodness or the survival of the company depends on the fiduciary. So you can't give precedence of your own benefits to the cause of the company. So Rajat Gupta was a fiduciary in Procter and Gamble and Goldman Sachs, but he thought about enriching, if not himself, at least his friends. Indian School of Business is still there. I think it has a new board of governors, and Goldman Sachs is still there. Procter and Gamble is there. McKinsey and Company is there. But who are not there? Rajat Gupta is not there as the shining star. And Raj Rajaratnam, the Sri Lankan guy, I think he's still in jail or he has just come out of the jail. I hope this episode of Rajat Gupta would have taught you the importance of maintaining highest ethical standards. People say that if you pay an executive a high salary, he is unlikely to be unethical. The case of Rajat Gupta proves that a person who was earning $10 million in salary for 6 years or 5 years or $10 million, I've just said, maybe 5 million or 10 million doesn't make so much of a difference to an individual who's for just one person. Salary, mind you, it's not a business. He's not running a business with this money. This money is for his own, for his rent, for his electricity, for his pension, for his children's education. It's a huge amount of money, huge amount of money. How many Americans make $5 to $10 million a year? Very few, very, very few. You can count them, maybe 1%, or maybe maximum 3% or 4%. So even he was tempted to indulge in something like insider trading, because what happens is people think that insider trading is just giving an information. So how will you get caught? But insider trading is a serious offense. It's a very, very serious offense. So by this lecture, I want to tell you the importance of knowing the law, following the law in letter and in spirit. And I want to caution you that the long arm of the law will catch up sooner or later. I hope you learned something from this video. The presentation on conflict of interest and other things will not be complete unless I discuss what is called the Anderson effect. Now, Anderson is effect is something which we may not know in India, but worldwide in the financial markets, in the corporate world, Anderson effect is a reference to auditors performing even more due diligence than previously required in order to prevent the accounting errors and financial errors and perhaps frauds and mishaps. Now, Anderson was a accounting company which was closely associated with Enron, and we all know about the big Enron collapse in the year 2001. Now, I will briefly explain the Anderson company and Anderson effect. The Anderson effect gets its name from a former Chicago-based accounting firm, Arthur Anderson LLP. LLP means limited liability company. By 2001, Arthur Anderson had grown into one of the big five accounting firms. Big five accounting firm means that it joined the likes of Price Waterhouse Coopers, Deloitte, Ernst and Young, KPMG. How big Arthur Anderson had become can be gauged simply by uh, knowing the number of people Anderson employed. Just before the Enron collapse happened, and I'll tell you what was Enron in brief. Just before Enron collapse happened, Anderson was employing around 28,000 people in the United States of America and 85,000 people worldwide. So if you put together more than 1 lakh people were employed in Arthur Anderson. It's a big company, and it was known for its for its ability to deploy experts internationally. You you needed an advice on the market situation in Pakistan or in India. Arthur Anderson was there, so they could deploy experts internationally to advise multinational businesses across on auditing practices, tax practices, consulting practices. So, in short, uh, Anderson was a very, very big company, and but by 2002, by 2002, all of the trust and glory of Anderson came tumbling down. Why? Because Enron happened. Enron was a very big publicly traded company which was into energy business and into a lot of businesses. And Enron's share was going up like anything. It was skyrocketing. And later on, it was revealed. In fact, it was one of the whistleblowers who had revealed that Enron was vastly overstating its revenue and profits, and it was vastly understating its debt. So much so that suppose Enron got into it signed an initial proposal with a company to provide services worth $100 million. And after a few months of negotiation, that project was shelved. Enron still Enron still included that future earnings, mark to market practices. It still included that earning into its books. So Enron was exaggerating its profit, and consequently the share was going up. And audit company for Enron, it was Arthur Andersen. So in June, Arthur Andersen was convicted for obstruction of justice. It for shredding documents. They took the documents and they shredded it, put into a shredder which related to audit of Enron. It resulted in what is famously called Enron scandal, but I think it is as much an Enron scandal as it was a Anderson scandal. Even the Security and Exchange Commission did not emerge unscathed. Security and Exchange Commission, or SEC, is the oversight body for the stock markets of US, just like we have SEBI here. So many accused the SEC of being asleep at the wheel, they said. But that aside, uh, from Enron, the up until highly reputable and respected Arthur Anderson, it lost all its reputation. More faulty audits on behalf of Arthur Anderson were discovered in the course of Enron indictment. Big name accounting scandals were linked to Arthur Anderson, and many other companies were. It was found out there were many other companies that Arthur Anderson was auditing, and they had all these scandals of overstating profits. There was a company also called WorldCom at that time, which went into bankruptcy, and I think WorldCom also was being audited by Enron. So subsequently, there is something called Sarbanes-Oxley, Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, or SOX. The bankruptcy of these companies like uh, WorldCom even surpassed Enron as the biggest bankruptcy in the history at that time. And this kind of resulted in what is called a domino effect of accounting and corporate scandals. The industry's reaction was very swift to avoid the Anderson effect by they tried to employ strong corporate governance. Industry itself adopted strong corporate governance and accounting controls. So, in response to these series of accounting scandals, like the ones by Arthur Anderson, US Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. The federal law established new or expanded requirements for all US public company boards, management, and public accounting firm. So an expected positive outcome of SOX is extra level of security has resulted in companies restating their earnings. So even if they are, so companies are kind of a bit conservative now. In if not conservating, they are not uh, overstating their profits. The bottom line is that even some of the biggest, most respected, most trustworthy accounting firms can collapse due to mismanagement taken on behalf of a client. Arthur Anderson, from being big five, it's nowhere. And once this SOX was passed to protect the client or investor interest, uh, one thing is for sure, that the big accounting firms also came into focus. They came into focus that these accounting firms could be in league with the companies they are supposed to audit. Instead of auditing them, they are giving them consultancies and advisories on how to give an impression of being so successful. Just like WorldCom, which was a US based telecom company which underwent bankruptcy, Enron. So, Barnes Soxley Act, SOX, the positive outcome of Enron scandal and especially the Arthur Anderson scandal. I, for one, believe that Arthur Anderson is equally to be believed for whatever happened in Enron, because a good auditor is supposed to be ringing the bell, an alarm bell, that you are overstating your profit. Instead of doing that, they not only kept quiet. It is said that they played a proactive role in cooking the books, shredding the documents related to the audit. So I have discussed with you three cases of conflict of interest. Here there is a clear conflict of interest between the auditing responsibilities of Arthur Andersen. Who was paying Arthur Andersen for its audit? This is also a case study. When it is the client which is paying a high fees to the auditor, there is conflict of interest. In perhaps in auditing business, there is inherent conflict of interest because the organization or the body which you are auditing is the one who's paying you the fees. But there are various steps which governments have taken. For example, in India, you cannot change an auditor just because the auditor is asking you to comply to the rules, or auditor is not willing to overlook your accounting errors or mistakes or deliberate ploys. Chartered accountancy. One thing is clear: a company which is auditing a company, external auditor cannot be the consulting company. Both entities cannot be the same, because if they are same, there is conflict of interest. But I am on a larger question of the fees. I was speaking to a very respected chartered accountant. It said perhaps it is time when the government should pay the audit fees for chartered accountancy companies and recover it from the client company. So we have taken the case of Rahul Dravid, and we have also discussed the case of Saurav Ganguly, and we have discussed the case of Arthur Anderson, and we have discussed the case of Rajat Gupta. My endeavor is not just to throw light upon these irregularities, but also to debate a larger point. Conflict of interest is subjective, but you cannot say because it is subjective, you did not understand it and you continue to indulge in acts of conflict of interest. I hope this video will enlighten you and it will provoke you to think more about this subject. Thank you very much.